Love. Interesting. When you go to the cinema on Valentine's night, cinemas put on films that they think are going to be representative of lovers. So chances are they're going to have Brief Encounter or Casablanca, maybe even Gone with the Wind if they're feeling particularly ambitious. Romance, as in terms of love, is really what we're looking at this time. So it's the idea of what music does when it's put to films about people falling in love, or about, more usually, love against a background of something that is going to prevent that love happening. Love in itself, two people falling in love and succeeding and having a happy marriage, that is not interesting, it's not dramatic. Cinema has always gone for love stories that have got a tortured element to them. And funnily enough, if you go right back to the beginning of film music and the use of film music, one of the earliest love affairs to be really delineated in music is that between King Kong and Fay Wray. Because Max Steiner knew that in order for us to care about this huge gorilla or tiny wire puppet, depending which way you want to look at King Kong, for us to care about him, we had to have music that made us feel what he felt. And you actually do have leitmotifs here. We'll come back to leitmotifs in a different section, but for now, all we need to know is that Max Steiner took the idea that Wagner had for a leitmotif, which is to find a piece of music, just a very short, very memorable hook, as we would now think of it, and make that hook fit to a specific character or a specific idea. So Max Steiner with King Kong actually makes King Kong's own leitmotif, that opening bum bum bum, it's just 3 chords. Then he actually makes Fay Wray's leitmotif, bum 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 dee 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 dee. It adds an extra little moment to the end, so that we know that there is a connection between these two. And in the big scene between them, in which Kong takes off her underwear and we see her in all her beauty in porn, you feel his love. And for the first time, we now think, wow, this is a hot-blooded male. This is a guy who thinks, she's very fanciable the same way we do. And we're in to King Kong. Now, love themes, per se, turned up a lot all the way through the 30s and 40s. Pieces of music that summed up an entire film and the intensity of its love affair, like, for instance, Betty Davis and Paul Henreid's Now Voyager. Here you have a love affair taking place which shouldn't happen. And in fact, the end of the affair is not consummated. But the music consummates it. And if you watch the last scene of Now Voyager, you will hear all the different elements of their love coming together to create a happy ending where there sort of isn't a happy ending. And of course, huge, great tunes that were produced at that time, wonderful sounds of love and soaring, and a lot of Hitchcock films, you get a fantastic love theme, usually played on strings. Very moving. Then the Second World War kind of arrives and warps our idea of love. Through the 30s, there's always still a sense that love is something big and beautiful and achievable that we all could want and we'd all want to take away with us. During the 40s and afterwards, you begin to get this sense of love as a counterpoint to cynicism. Love for sale, love for reasons that have nothing to do with actual emotional attachment. And you begin to see films coming out in which the love affairs are doomed, or in which the love affairs are perverse, shouldn't be happening. And for me, the great romantic noir film of all time is Double Indemnity. The music for Double Indemnity says all the way through, this is a doomed love affair. And even when there is warmth, there's always a note of, a chilling note, I think anyway, of warning that this woman is not to be trusted, that Fred MacMurray's character is making a massive mistake. And here we have the superb abilities of Miklos Rozsa. Miklos Rozsa, for me, is one of the greatest of all film composers. He used thick, dark textures for his films, particularly his noir films. And in the particular case of Double Indemnity, the head of the studio, who was in charge of the music, wanted to throw the score out because he thought it sounded awful. Thankfully, the man in charge of Double Indemnity, Billy Wilder, listened to it and knew better, because he understood that this wasn't a score about big open sounds. This was a score about dark, intense, brooding, strange chords, and yet they have their own beauty. And so we see love as a dark place to go. And later on, through the 40s and 50s, we begin to get jazz coming in, for instance, which gives us such a sense of physical love. Look at Streetcar Named Desire. Look at the first time that Brando meets Blanche, this vulnerable character played by Vivien Leigh. Look at the physicality of that. Hear what the jazz music's doing to that. You can hear the sound of a climbing clarinet getting higher and higher and higher during this incredible kind of encounter between them. And it is a terrible sense of kind of physical brutality and yet wonderment. You can see Vivien Leigh absolutely adores this phenomenal man, and yet she is not someone who could handle what he is. If you want to see the Distaff side of that, look what Paul Verhoeven did with Basic Instinct and listen to what the music's doing there, because it turns every sexual encounter into the possibility of gruesome murder. And lust is kind of represented by the music in very much a kind of way that I think now dates it in a strange way. It feels very 1992. As we move on into the 50s and 60s, of course, pop begins to represent young love, and rightly so. And the whole sense of the physicality of rock and roll, how that then turns into rock and starts to speak for a generation, how a younger generation could really only communicate to itself in film through the music that it understood and knew for itself, makes total sense. But even there's the odd time that kind of sticks out. And of course you have, therefore, a whole stream of Elvis Presley movies which are about love, in which Elvis's music and his macro personality is brought down into a whole series of fictionalized films. And yet those songs, the way he is, the fact that he can just burst into song, it's a musical like any other musical. And yet the music is so powerful. Rock and roll changes the way that film music is seen. There is more and more pop, more and more rock creeps into film scores. And also, of course, when you get to the 70s and 80s, you have filmmakers who are of that generation themselves. So they're using their own music to tell love stories. They're bringing in music that means stuff to them. Even the most perverse love stories. Harold and Maude, a young, disturbed man, a very, very old lady. That love story is kind of cheered along by Cat Stevens. And that sense of a kind of innocence and an understanding in the music is something that comes back again in a wonderful movie, Short Bus, that was out only a few years ago, which finishes off with the superbly inclusive "we're all going to get it in the end," where you have this sense that love is all embracing, as is death. It's the thing we've all got to look forward to, so make the most of it. And the final scene of Short Bus is this massive musical celebration of every possible kind of physical love, every kind of physical love, and is a sort of wonderful description of love as well. We've changed over the years, obviously. The love theme that fitted a Tchaikovsky ballet back in the 19th century has now become a cliche for us now. And yet there are certain things that we still bring from those sort of formative classical years in terms of what we hear as love. Now when we see people falling in love on a screen, the music won't be big and brassy and beautiful. It's more likely to be simple, because simplicity now is what speaks to us of love. It's about truth in a world in which there isn't much truth. And to believe in real love, we have to believe that these two people are genuinely in love with each other. And so you will get very simple solo piano, solo guitar, something that doesn't feel embellished, that just feels real. That's more likely what you're going to get these days. And yet, to look at one of the great doomed love affairs of the 1950s and 60s, let's look at where we're going to go in more detail in the next one, at Vertigo, because here we go back to the beginning again. We go back to Wagner, we go back to Wagner's extraordinary Tristan and Isolde. And if you listen to the prelude from Tristan and Isolde, you can hear the keening of two lovers who cannot meet, two lovers who are kept apart. And that keening sound is what Bernard Herrmann took and turned into the music that we now hear for Vertigo. Just listen to what this prelude is doing. Listen to the way, particularly, that the voices are giving voice to a sense of a kind of eerie yearning. There's space around this music. And this sense of a Wagnerian take on love comes back to us again with Vertigo in a way that it simply can't with some of the great love stories of the 30s and 40s, because the intensity isn't there to the same degree. The intensity comes when we understand that this is a love which has a dark side to it. Here we've got somebody who understands that very ancient sense of music speaking at a very deep level. And Vertigo still works. That sense of the music still works. And for us as we go on, well, in the future, who knows what love's going to sound like. Love is what you want to make of it. Your idea of what love music sounds like is probably completely different to mine, different to his, different to hers, different to theirs, whatever. Doesn't matter if you're into Tchaikovsky or into nose flute or into the Band of the Coldstream Guards. Your sense of what love music sounds like is yours. That is the whole point. We surround ourselves with music we love. The job of film composers always is to try and find the universal sound of love. How unbelievably difficult is that? The good ones who can pull it off well, I think of people like Thomas Newman, who've done a fantastic job with something like American Beauty, where there is this wonderful sense of a kind of crisp, vulnerable love in those opening titles. And if you want pure, straight love, the way we had it back in the 1930s, you can do a lot worse than going to a children's film. Have a look at Wall-E and feel that dance that Wall-E and Ava do in space when they finally, as it were, consummated their electronic love. That's Thomas Newman. It's beautiful, it's balletic, it's this wonderful sense that he has finally got what we wanted. We've been rooting for Wall-E from the first moment. And of course, beyond that, dance. Dance so often means love. One of the greatest seductions in all cinema is Fred Astaire telling Ginger Rogers how he feels about her. Having started the scene with her hating him, he takes her to dance. He tells her that she makes him feel like he's in heaven. He then waltzes her out, and as you watch her face, she slowly gives in more and more and more to him until he can whip her out onto the balcony and dance with her. It doesn't get steamier than that, as far as I'm concerned.